So it is Friday, May 18th. I want to welcome you to Let's Talk Native on the LTN Radio Network. This program breaks all the rules for Native radio. No buffalo speeches, no mystic healing, no special Indian prayers. We tackle the real issues facing Native people with a look back at our glorious and our grave history, a tough look at where we're at now, and a look forward to our ongoing battles for sovereignty and autonomy. Let's Talk Native is produced in association with Iroquois Promotions on the LTN Radio Network, streaming live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation, and streaming and simulcast and rebroadcast on the Gwe, that's CKWE in Tandanega. You can find us streaming live at www.ltnradionet.com. And, of course, we are Facebook Live. Got an interesting subject to talk about today, so I will be looking for your comments on Facebook Live. So if you want to weigh in, I know there's some mixed feelings on this because in posting the promo for the show, I had some folks come out perhaps on the side of this issue that I didn't really expect. So here it is. Obviously, over the last couple of weeks, and in fact, even going back over the last 6 weeks, I've mentioned a number of times the disproportionate use of force and aggression that Israel has had against Palestinian protesters in Gaza at the border fence. And of course, it was on complete vulgar display on last week when you had the United States declaring or moving, I guess, officially moving the embassy to Jerusalem, a day that Israel was celebrating their Independence Day. And of course, more people. I mean, I want to say, 14,000 some people, I think, showed up. Palestinians showed up to protest what they think are unlivable conditions at in Gaza because of the limited amount of electricity and supply and food and employment and the basic necessities of life that exist in Gaza because of the oppression and the control that Israel is asserting. So they've been protesting. Obviously, the Palestinians have been protesting Israeli occupation in many of the places, including territories or areas that Israel has pushed settlements upon, in direct opposition to UN orders and things like that. But it was clearly, I mean, it couldn't have been more clearly demonstrated than on the day that Israel was firing upon these protesters in such a way that killed over 60 of them, or I think approximately 60 Palestinians were killed. Now, keep in mind, the vast majority of the people who have been injured, fired upon, and killed are unarmed protesters. Now, there are people who have been throwing stones at a fence and trying to cut the fence. There have been people who have lit tires on fire, and although none of this has been backed up, there has been reports of Molotov cocktails and everything else. But I'll tell you, none of the reporters, nobody has seen any of this. But this is what Israel claims to be taking place, and their response has been to fire live rounds upon them. At this point, and again, according to Reuters, over 12,000 people have been injured. Palestinians, no injuries. There's no injuries of Israeli soldiers reported, by the way. 12,000 injured. 3,500 of them have been injured by live rounds. Now, what Israel says is, well, yeah, we're firing live rounds, but we're only shooting them in the legs. I mean, you're using a lethal weapon and saying because you're simply shooting them in the legs that it's okay? I mean, people can obviously bleed to death, and they can be crippled, and they can, be permanently injured, obviously, with a gunshot, even to the legs or below the waist, as what they're claiming. But out of that, over 100 have been killed, like 60 of them in one day. Of the ones who have been shot and fired upon, it hasn't just, in spite of the claim by Israel, it hasn't been, people necessarily performing acts of aggression even towards an inanimate object like a fence. It's been children, It's been reporters have been shot and injured. In fact, I was watching a story today about a doctor from not far from here, from London, Ontario, who went there, who was shot in the leg, and he wasn't even near a site. Now, keep in mind, these live rounds, there are people aiming these guns. These aren't just people indiscriminately firing into a crowd. They're actually targeting who they're shooting. So you consider over 100 people have been killed, over 3,500 have been injured by live rounds, and a total of 12,000 people have been injured altogether. Only on one side of the fence. Only on one side of the fence. Now, I know there's a whole lot of people who just think that, that Israel is just always going to be justified no matter what they do. But I've got to liken this. I've got to take some of this stuff home here. Like I said, if you weren't outraged by the border agent who was cleared of all charges, who took his Glock out and fired 16 shots at a 16-year-old boy on the other side of the Mexican border fence, and killed him. He was down a hill and on the other side of the fence. This guy poked his gun through the gap in the wall, and fired upon this kid. He said he fired upon him because the kid was throwing stones. So if you're okay with that, then clearly you're okay with Israel just firing upon Palestinians on the other side of a fence. If you're okay with that, then you must have been okay with Morton County sheriffs and the National Guard and all of the other folks that showed up at Standing Rock to fire, rubber bullets at point blank range at people, to use their sound cannons to hose these guys down in sub-freezing temperatures, and to blast these guys in the face with pepper spray. You must have been okay with all that aggression at Standing Rock if you're okay with Israel firing upon unarmed protesters in Gaza. And if you're okay with that, then I don't know how you reconcile being, a fan of this show or the stuff that I post. But see, this is where it gets more complicated, because we could say, look, that's Israel, that's over there, it's got nothing to do with us. Israel has been the victim of genocide, and look, and I'm not a Holocaust denier. I'm also not anti-Semitic. But what I will say is this is where we run into conflict here, and this is what I'm talking about. In July, Israel is hosting the FIL Men's Lacrosse World Championship. Now, how they got to host this thing, I don't know. Usually, you gotta. There should be some standard for being able to host these kinds of things. Israel is not exactly in good standing throughout the world in its aggressive behavior towards Palestinians, towards black people, towards all kinds of people. Because to be clear, Israel is not a democracy. 40% of the population of Jerusalem are Palestinians. They can't vote in a Palestinian or in an Israeli election, because they said, well, they're not Israeli, but they live in the territory. And their territory has been occupied and controlled by Israel. It's a strange thing. In the absence of a two-state solution, which nobody seems to be moving towards, including the United States or Israel, then the only other solution is, well, then what rights do the people who are not Jewish have in Israel? So there's all kinds of problems there, and yet they get to host this lacrosse tournament. Now, here's the problem that I have. Lacrosse is our game. And we as Native people, it seems to me, and it's been this way for quite a while, this game is not just a game. And, without getting into the whole creators game stuff, and, there's plenty of people who can do that, and that's not necessarily where I go. But what I will say is that I'm not sure that our game should be hosted by a country that is so aggressive towards an indigenous people. I just think that we're giving them too much respect. And I don't think. I mean, not only do I think that it's wrong for them to have for Israel to have gotten the opportunity to host this thing, but I'm equally disturbed by the Iroquois Nationals sending our athletes there. And of course, this is usually Onondaga run and Onondaga controlled. And I've got a comment here. Somebody said FNA, right? They should compete. I don't know. I don't think that we should pay that kind of respect to Israel to have our athletes compete in a game in a tournament that they host. And here's the reason why why there's silence on this issue. The reason there's silence on this issue is because Israel has agreed to accept, from what I understand, and I could have some of this wrong, that Israel has agreed to accept the Haudenosaunee passports, which has been a long-standing problem with our athletes traveling to other countries. That's why they didn't get to go to Manchester, England back in 2010. At the same time, the United States is considering its position on the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. They're denying our right to create our own travel documents. Now, just because Israel's accepting those passports doesn't mean the United States is necessarily cooperating. So, look, I think it's fine to have diplomatic relations with countries who have different systems and have diverse ways of looking at things. But I think when you look at a country that is being not just aggressive, but oppressive towards an indigenous people, I can't help it, but I have to think that if you look at our histories, we are more analogous to the Palestinians here than we are to the Israelis. And if you question whether, if you're fully on board with Israel's aggression here, if you're like Australia and the United States and you think that Israel can do no wrong, if you believe that, then what you're saying is the rest of the world is all wrong, including the reporters that were there to see all this stuff, because no reporters are backing up Israel's claims. The best that I've heard is people say, "Well, we didn't see it. We're not saying it didn't happen. Somebody with Molotov cocktails, or maybe some people they claim that they've had explosives, which is probably just a bottle full of gasoline." But the best any reporter has said is, we can't say that it didn't happen, but we haven't seen it. And of course, there are doctors and there are reporters and there are people, not just Hamas devotees that are the victims of this stuff, but by all of the independent observations that are taking place, everybody who's reported on this thing says the aggression has been disproportionate. The vast majority of Palestinians who have shown up at the border fence in Gaza were unarmed. And the vast majority of those who have been injured have been unarmed, because nobody is seeing any armed protesters there. There are no independent corroboration of the claim that Israel is making that that they've been armed protesters. I mean, unless you consider somebody with wire cutters being armed. I mean, if that's what if you think somebody who goes there to cut a hole in a fence is an armed protester, well, then I guess that's armed. But see, as a native person, as a person who have seen this kind of aggression and this kind of controlled movement, everything from the whole reservation system that turned portions of our own territories into concentration camps, guarded by U.S. military, for over 100 years, to the imposition of residential schools where our children were imprisoned, to the abject poverty that has been imposed on our people on our territories. I'll tell you, it starts to look an awful lot like what the Palestinians are going through at the hands of Israel. Israel is playing the role of the United States, and the Palestinians are the native people. Now, and I'm not suggesting, and I'm really not saying that Israel does not have some claim or some validity to their claim to live in that region. I'm not saying that they don't have a claim. But if you're going to say that Israel has the claim if the Jews have a claim to Israel, then where's all the noise about our claims? We've got judges. We've got judges sitting on the Supreme Court of the United States who are Jewish, who will cite and stand with the doctrine of Christian discovery as justification for throwing our land use cases out. In 2005, Ruth Bader Ginsburg cites the doctrine of Christian discovery in footnote number 1 as the justification for ruling against the Oneidas, who weren't trying to promote land claims. They weren't trying to lay claim to a land. They purchased land. They purchased and said, no, this is in our Aboriginal claim area, one that the Supreme Court previously has ruled we have the right to sue for fair title. We've purchased the land, and we're taking it back. We're taking it off the tax roll. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, no, you can't do that. You can't do that because the doctrine of Christian discovery said that the title to the land became vested in the sovereign. No, not you. You're native people. You're not sovereign. Became vested in the sovereign. First, the discovering nations of Europe, then the states, and then the United States. She didn't say how it became vested, but she just cited this doctrine of Christian discovery that the Christian nations of Europe could just claim land once they came upon land that was only occupied by native people who didn't believe in Christianity. So if you came upon a pagan land, you could consider that land empty. In fact, they called it terra nullius, void of occupancy, void of people. It wasn't void of people, but it was void of who they consider people, because they could look at a native person and say, no, you're not a human being. The idea of shooting somebody, the first thing you have to do is accept that body, that person, that entity somehow does not have the right to live. Or has surrendered that right to freedom and to life and to all that stuff. One of the easiest ways to do it is to dehumanize that person. And there's a whole lot of dehumanization happening, by Israel, by Donald Trump, by a whole vast majority, a lot of people. A lot of people. But, the whole idea that you have a country firing live rounds at somebody because they have a slingshot. One of the analogies that one of the expressions being used is that the policy of Israel is an eye for an eyelash. Forget the eye for an eye thing. Tooth for a tooth. No, eye for an eyelash. So your mere presence, your mere display of dissatisfaction of the aggression of Israel can place you within the line of fire. In fact, you don't even have to display that your resistance. You have to just be there in the capacity of helping those people. So when you see this doctor from London, Ontario, shot in the leg, it's a little hard to suggest that these snipers from Israel are such bad shots that they're accidentally shooting a doctor or a reporter or a young child. I'm sorry. These guys, Israel prides itself on their training, on the skill of their military. I think when they shoot somebody, it was pretty well intended. It's not an accident, and it isn't just arbitrary shooting into a crowd. They're taking aim and they're firing. So I get back to our question. Look, it's clear that I am bothered by this kind of aggression. But what I'm also bothered by is the fact that by participating in a tournament, a world tournament hosted by Israel, it's an endorsement of them. It is. I mean, if you're going to respect that country enough and their politics, essentially, and what they represent on the world stage, to send our athletes, our young men, to compete in a games hosted by them, in a way, it has to be a bit of an endorsement of of their behavior. Unless you're going to go there and raise hell, and then you got to worry. Well, should we send our athletes there? And what if our athletes went there and supported Palestine? What if our athletes wore a patch on their shirt? Hey, all right, I'm okay with that. I'm not sure that I want to send my son to do that though in Israel. Because, again, eye for an eyelash. You put a Palestinian patch on your jersey and you might find yourself getting shot. So, look, I know people get disturbed about sports and politics and all that other stuff, but, being Haudenosaunee and even traveling as Haudenosaunee is political. And let's face it. I mean, this lacrosse team, Iroquois Nationals, has been politicized in a big way, especially by Onondaga. I mean, it is their means to promote their passport. It's how they do it. And in fact, internally we could reflect on what it takes to get an Iroquois or a Haudenosaunee passport. Apparently, you have to be a good lacrosse player, because the scrutiny that Onondaga puts into play when somebody else. Trust me, I would not be able to get a Haudenosaunee passport from Onondaga unless I could throw shoot a lacrosse ball 100 miles an hour and shave maybe 30 years off my life or something like that. Go back in time, not shave off my life, I guess. But no, I mean, this is there's a disproportionate evaluation used on who is justified in getting a Haudenosaunee passport, and apparently there's also a disproportionate there seems to be a value placed on the countries who will accept a Haudenosaunee passport as to how much you can look the other way on what those countries represent. And that's what's at play here. The problem that I have is what Israel is doing to Palestinians is wrong. And if we ignore that by fully embracing their hosting of a lacrosse tournament, our game, if we are willing to look the other way and then go there and thank Israel for hosting and just heap praise upon them and send our men, our athletes to Israel to, again, to honor the host, I just think that it's wrong. And I will say that I have heard a few athletes who said, I'm not sure that I want to go to Israel. I'm not sure that I can go in good faith and good conscience, compete in Israel, knowing what they're doing to Palestinians. I've heard a few athletes, and I'm not going to name names or anything, but I've heard a few people say it. But I wonder if that has legs. I wonder if more people are willing to say that. And where's the great Oren Lyons on this stuff? Where's the great Sid Hill? Where are these so-called chiefs and faith keepers and peacemakers and all? Where are they? They seem to be pretty silent. As it is, I think Oren's getting another honorary doctorate at Lemoyne College or something this weekend. So, he's going to be honored and praised. And I'm interested to see is he going to mention Palestine? Is he going to mention Israel? He's all about sending a lacrosse team there in a month or so, in a couple of months. And I just, look, I know people don't like to miss sports and politics, and the idea of boycotting a sporting event. You look, as tragic as it was that our team could not compete in when Manchester, England hosted this tournament. The problem was that we didn't hold them accountable. We didn't say, what the hell's wrong with you? You signed on the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples at that time. Why aren't you standing up to the United States? And to the extent that Israel is saying, "Oh, we'll accept your passports," and this actually goes back to even my concern about Seneca President Todd Gates trying to honor Israel's Independence Day, ignoring, again, even at that time, some of the aggression that was happening. Because in the midst of him doing these protests were already happening, and some of these deaths were occurring early on. And the problem that I have with it, you have to look the other way. You have to ignore the fact that Israel's committing these crimes against humanity. And again, look, I know there's some of you out there who say, you know what? Israel has the right to defend itself. And that's what Nikki Haley said, in the UN ambassador from the United States. They have a right to defend themselves. Yeah, okay. You know, but there was a whole lot of stuff that they could have learned from Morton County sheriffs and those folks in Standing Rock. They 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 were pretty aggressive to our people trying to stop a pipeline without firing live rounds. They used, they used weapons, and inappropriately, I might add, because even those rubber bullets are only supposed to be used at 30 meters, and they were shooting people at point blank range. That's not what Israel's doing. No, live rounds. And they say as long as we shoot them, we can somehow come across as as humanitarian because we're shooting them in the legs and in the thighs and in the buttocks and that kind of stuff. That's the reasoning. But look, as much as we can say, look, that's their business. It doesn't involve us. Well, it does involve us when we start saying, okay, we're going to go there. We're going to send. I mean, there's no question that that when we send a lacrosse team to another country, they are representing us. They are like our ambassadors, right? And I've heard that you said we can't say that, oh, no, it's just sports now. Why? So because we want to look the other way on what Israel's doing? Look, either when we send a delegation, we send a team, a coaching staff and athletes to another country, either they are ambassadors for us or they're not. Don't just switch it around because now they're going to a country that they probably shouldn't be going to. Don't say, no, this is purely sports. This isn't political. Well, what happened to all this creators game and these are ambassadors and these are, look, I know the teams that have been representing the Iroquois Nationals over the last decade have been represented themselves pretty good. It wasn't always the way before that. I've heard some pretty ugly horror stories about some of our past Iroquois National teams and their behavior when they've been on the road. But these guys have represented themselves. The teams over the last few years have been representing themselves pretty well. But if they're going there as ambassadors, then what are you saying about the host country if you're sending your athletes there? I think that's the question. And that's why I raised the question. I have some issues. I do have some issues with what Israel's doing. And the fact that for whatever reason we're going to place a higher value on our relationship with Israel simply because they're willing to accept their passports and ignore everything else? Look, while I am not anti-Semitic, I recognize some issues that oftentimes get swept under the rug. Ruth Bader Ginsburg's use of the doctrine of Christian discovery is one of them, but there's more. We're at the bottom of the hour, so we're going to take a break here, and I'm going to catch up on some of the comments that are coming up on my Facebook live stream. We'll come back in just a minute. Let me go out with some tunes, and I'll check out my messages, and we'll be right back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native.
Sense. Now you got me, baby, up against the fence, and it's a shame, shame, shame. Yeah, it's a shame when you, girl, it's a shame, 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 shame on you. Well, now you go out when you're gone, 6 o'clock in the morning, you come walking home, and it's a shame, shame, shame. Yeah, it's a shame when you do. Girl, it's a shame, 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 shame on you. Yeah. sitting all alone, and it's a shame, shame, shame. Damn shame when you do. Girl, it's a shame, shame, shame. Shame on you.
All right, thanks for coming back. Hey, let me give a shout out to my sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses, Eric White and ERW Enterprises, Legacy 420 in Tandanega. I want to thank individuals like Ed Schindler, Cynthia Trice, Roger Jock, Neville Spring, and others who help from time to time. I also want to thank those who have helped in the past, who may not necessarily be contributing to the show now, but have done so in the past that have, and you guys have allowed us to begin our entry into our 9th year here. We were on commercial radio before, and it was very expensive, and I had many of the businesses here in Cattaraugus and Seneca Territory in general, a couple out in Tonawanda that advertise on a regular basis, and I want to thank you. I want to thank you so much for supporting the show. I also want to thank Unity Stream and Apache Radio Net for providing our streaming. And thank again CKWE for the simulcast and the rebroadcasts of the show, as well as Netroots Radio, Real People's Media, Indigenous Resistance Radio for carrying Let's Talk Native on their networks. And I want to thank all of you who share the program, especially my wife Brenda, who shares my my show to many of the Facebook group pages. But I also know many of you share not only the Facebook live stream, but you share the SoundCloud audio. And some of you share our YouTube videos as well. So I thank all of you for doing that. It's a way to have a conversation. And, it's like this year. I mean, look, these are the conversations we need to have. I think that this isn't a big deal. I mean, do I think it is life-threatening? Well, I guess. I mean, in a way, I'm always concerned about sending loved ones or people that we care about, or including our athletes, to areas that are unstable politically, from a violent standpoint. Look, I realize that the United States isn't exactly the most stable anymore either. So but it's something about defending yourself at home is a little bit easier than going into a foreign land like Israel, one that is clearly in a position of aggression. Again, they're also in a place where there are many enemies around them. And we can we can say it's justified or not justified, but the reality is, I think we have to have these conversations. I want to thank a couple of folks who were commenting, Todd, Paula, and Rachel, for your comments on Facebook. Paula in particular, you hit it on the head. I mean, when we send a team called the Iroquois Nationals or Team Haudenosaunee, whatever you want to call them, what are they representing? Are they only representing Oren Lions, in Sid Hill, or are they representing all of our territories? And when I say all of our territories, I mean Haudenosaunee territories. Are they representing the Seneca Nation? Are they there are Senecas there? Are they representing Mohawks? And so are we really making a decision as peoples on sending a team to Israel? Or are we leaving it completely up to the athletes? And I'm not opposed to leaving it up to the athletes. But so where do these athletes have any say when this team is put together and when they're trying out for Team Haudenosaunee or the Iroquois Nationals? Or do they just go where Oren sends them? This is part of the question. And I think it warrants exploring the question and coming up with answers that take all of the issues into consideration. Because clearly, among the things that need to be taken into consideration is the risk. Is not only the risk associated with sending our athletes to an area that sees this kind of violence and that has no problem oppressing people. Like our people haven't gone through enough, right? But there's also the risk of what we are saying politically by sending our team there. And I think that's the point. The point is, if we send a team to a country that is doing something that we should condemn, are we looking the other way and endorsing their behavior? And I think we are. I think if you look the other way, I mean, I heard somebody say, yeah, but we don't boycott when the United States hosts these games. Well, look, it is a little different. It is a little different because the United States isn't hosting these games as a country. Oftentimes, it's a city that's hosting it. And when you're talking about a country like Israel, it's Israel hosting this. Yeah, I mean, I know it's being hosted in a city in Israel, but it is a statement by the entire country, which is a little different if we're talking about Los Angeles hosting an Olympics, or Lake Placid hosting an Olympics. Is the United States is essentially getting the winning the bid for those games. And look, there are protests that should happen. If you don't endorse the behavior of a country that hosts a game, there should be some sort of demonstration. The question is, are our athletes going to be allowed to voice their opinion about the behavior of Israel when they go there, or are they going to be muzzled? I mean, that's the question. I mean, it was interesting. If I go back to when Onondaga was in Syracuse, I should say, was hosting the indoor lacrosse games a few years ago. Onondaga spent $20 million to become famous, I guess. Claiming, it's the first time we ever hosted a game. They didn't even host the major games. They hosted the secondary games, but most of the main games were played at the Carrier Dome in Syracuse at Syracuse University. But when that was happening, the girls, our female lacrosse team, the women's team, was not allowed to go to England to compete, and they had to remain silent on it. Why? Because they wouldn't. Again, it was a passport issue. So they weren't allowed to talk about what was happening internationally because Onondaga was too overwhelmed with pride for being able to host or be a partial host of the games that were played in Syracuse. So politics gets played in all of this stuff, and of course we end up putting a muzzle on people. So as much as I don't think that our athletes should go to Israel and should honor Israel with their presence and with our team, right? If they are going to go, then they should be able to express themselves, and they should be able to speak openly, and they should make and they should have access to the media to say, look, I'm coming here and I'm competing, and if I am going to come here and compete, I have to voice my concern about what Israel's doing to Palestine. I mean, I guess I could embrace this a little bit more. But if our people have to go to Israel and remain silent and not be able to address the oppression of indigenous peoples there, then I have a problem with that. And look, I know, again, I know there are people out there who say, let's not forget, there's Israel's got to be able to defend itself. Look, shooting at people at a fence is not necessary. The national security of Israel, could be subdued with pepper spray if they felt that strongly about it. They can line up their military along there, but they don't necessarily. I mean, they got a fence between them. They don't need to be taking shots with sniper fire, using sniper fire against people protesting, and of course the fence itself is part of the problem. The abject poverty that Palestinians are forced to live under in Gaza and in other areas of Israel, or not just Israel, but of occupied territory, that is part of the problem. Everybody says, "Oh, it's all Hamas's fault." Well, many of the people who have been interviewed by the media. I know, fake news and all this stuff, right? If you buy into that crap too. But what the media has been covering is saying, nah, most of these people aren't necessarily coming here representing Hamas. They're coming here because they have college degrees and they can't work. They can't have a family because they can't earn an income. I mean, that is the problem. If you're not really paying attention to the conditions that Palestinians are forced to live under, I mean, that'd be like ignoring the abject poverty that the Native people in the U.S. and Canada are living under. Look, we can't we can't make the case for our autonomy, our distinction, our right for land use, and our right to thrive and succeed as a people, and ignore what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. We can't sit there and make the argument against occupied territory in Hawaii or in Bears Ears or anyplace else and ignore the fact that Israel is defying the United Nations with settlement activity and all kinds of other, all kinds of other activities. And every time, Israel does something militarily, there's an outcry. Oh, yeah, they got to be able to defend themselves. 38 Dakota were hung by the neck in Mankato, Minnesota, because of Abraham Lincoln's not only his execution order that authorized it, but him signing the Homestead Act that authorized white people to take Lakota lands. Look, folks, I just think we have to have this conversation, and if there's no conversation allowed to happen over this, then we just play the game. We just play lacrosse and we pretend in this instance that there is no political connotation associated with an Iroquois national team playing in a world games, because that's what we've been told every single time one of these things happen. Every single time we when it comes to we'll silence the women, right? But when it comes to the men, I mean, that's why Steven Spielberg, or James Cameron and all these people, all these, Hollywood and people were hit up to support the Iroquois Nationals back in 2010 when they were hanging around in New York, hoping that they could still manage to get a chance to play in Manchester, England. We played up the politics fine then. But now when a political stand could be taken against the abuse of indigenous peoples, we're going to ignore it? I just have a problem with that. And you know what? It is time for Native people to weigh in. I mean, I see it on Facebook. For the most part, the overwhelming response that I've seen from Native people relating to what Israel is doing to Palestine has been in support of Palestinians. But I'm not hearing anything. I don't hear a resolution coming from the Seneca Nation. I heard one from the president of Seneca Nation, praising Israel's Independence Day and their warrior spirit. But I didn't see them saying anything about their oppressive spirit, and taking it to the extreme. No commentary. I haven't heard anything from anybody. I haven't heard Oren Lyons. I haven't heard a word from Oren Lyons or Sid Hill. I didn't hear any solidarity at the United Nations during the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Rights, Indigenous Issues. Why not? Palestinians are indigenous people. So where's the solidarity? Why aren't we standing with people who are experiencing the same thing? And I want to catch myself on this. Not the same thing that we have experienced, but the same thing that we do experience. Again, if you didn't see the imagery of Standing Rock and see some parallel, only it's even worse in Israel, because unlike Standing Rock, where they were, inappropriately using rubber bullets and concussion grenades and water cannons and sound cannons and pepper spray, Israel's using bullets, folks. Claiming, we're only shooting people in the leg. Doctors, reporters, kids. Over 16 children have been killed. 106 people have been killed. 12,000 injured. 3,500 have been killed or have been injured by live fire. Now, look, and if those numbers do suggest that that even though 3,500 people have been killed or been injured by live rounds, since only 100 died, there's clearly a distinguishing, they are not necessarily shooting to kill. They're shooting to maim and to injure. And you know what this is called? When you use a bloody violence against a people to discourage a behavior, you know what that's called? It's called terrorism, folks. When you shoot somebody, not just to injure that person, but to send a message to somebody else, that's called terrorism. By definition. By definition. So the idea of shooting 3,500 people, injuring over 12,000 people, that's supposed to instill fear and terror in people. So, I mean, I guess this is the question. I mean, this is the question. Yeah, knowing, here we're trying so hard to get a voice in the United Nations, and yet we're going to allow our athletes to go to a country that violates UN sanctions. They, again, thank you, Paula, for that. Yeah, they're violating, especially in all these settlement areas. They are clearly violating the United Nations. So, again, our United States and Australia are right there with Israel on that. What a coincidence! Two countries that also stand in stark violation of the United Nations when it comes to indigenous peoples. I mean, two of the worst countries. I don't know where Canada is on all this. I haven't heard anything out of Canada yet. Although you would think, since one of their doctors was just all over, I think CNN or I saw them on on one of the news channels, having gotten shot in the leg from London, Ontario. But I mean, I don't know how we remain silent on this issue. We should be condemning Israel, and I'm not saying condemning all Jewish people, but we should be condemning what Israel is doing to Palestinians. And of course, I mean, we've got our own battles here. Let's face it. I mean, we've got an administration in the White House who believes that that this idea of Native people asserting any kind of sovereignty is wrong. Trump's belief is that Native people should be considered a race within the American system, just a race. And of course, we can debate whether race is a real thing or not, or just an invention of white people in the first place. But then you got another white guy trying to reduce us down to a race. Doesn't want to recognize the fact that we have any distinction in terms of sovereignty, or forget about it. The UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which is only the minimum standard. He wants to ignore history. I mean, so we do have a problem. We do have a serious problem with our own existence here. But again, if we aren't prepared to take a position against Israel, then we sure as hell shouldn't be sending a team bearing our name or our passports, to a country that is in open defiance of the United Nations, is in open defiance of the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, as well as other sanctions that the UN has attempted to place on Israel, but usually gets vetoed by the United States. I think we have to rethink what we're doing with these teams and what we're doing with our sport. That's my view on this. Look, we're running out of time. I'd be remiss so I didn't mention that there was another school shooting today in Texas. Who knew, right? I mean, Texas with some of the most lax gun laws in the country. 17-year-old kid walks in and kills nine students and one teacher, from what I understand. They, white kid, so they took him to custody. So he's, it always cracks me up. It's like the news has to say alleged shooter, even if they even if they caught him red-handed shooting people, they still have to say alleged shooter. Now, I don't know. Apparently, he used a pistol and a shotgun. So all of you who are making the argument that you can kill a lot of people with a shotgun, not just with an AR-15, and feel validated, well, look, if it was an AR-15, there'd be more than 10 dead. So, yeah, it was a shotgun and a pistol, and and he managed to kill 10 people, and that's just, I mean, that is just terrible. The idea of, not being able to send your children, to school for fear that something like this is going to happen. And I know, we're going to get into a debate on whether the kid was treated right, and is, again, we'll have this debate whether the victims are responsible for the actions of the individual who fired upon them, because, whether he was bullied or whether he was not loved enough by fellow students. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I heard that some of the coaches, he tried out for football, and some of the coaches didn't treat him well. I look. I'm not. I am not advocating any any misuse of fellow human beings, and I don't think kids should have a terrible experience going to school. They shouldn't feel bullied, and I see the issue. I mean, I've dealt with it within my own family, and deal with it within my own family, and the idea that you have to teach your kids to be aggressive so they can stand up for themselves. Why can't kids just be who they are? Why can't somebody just be a nice person, or a meek or a humble person, or a mild mannered person, and not feel like they have to be pushed to the point of aggression to stand up to a bully? So no, I am absolutely opposed to the idea of students treating each other badly. I've always been one of the ones who will defend somebody who is being picked on, and and it's what I try to instill in my children when they went through school, is not to ever tolerate somebody being picked on. Certainly not to be involved in it, but if you see it, to assist somebody, whether they're disabled, whether they're again shy, whether they're nerdy or whatever else anybody wants to label somebody. Don't participate, and in fact stand up to people mistreating somebody. But none of that stuff is justification for somebody grabbing his dad's weapons and showing up in school and killing people. And anybody who doesn't see that there's a gun problem in the United States just isn't paying attention. And of course now you're going to have the NRA run out, and here's the sad part. Because this happened, a whole bunch of gun lovers are going to throw more money at the NRA right now. The knee-jerk reaction is every time an act of violence takes place like this, not only does the NRA kick open its campaign for support, gun lovers of America start throwing dollar after dollar after dollar at the NRA and their new president, Ollie North. I mean, I don't know. It's a strange world that we live in, and one that is getting mired in more controversy on a daily basis. There's oftentimes these shootings are tied to some element of white supremacy, or oftentimes religious fanaticism, not the fundamental Islamic radicalization, but Christian radicalization. This kid is the early reports suggest that he may have been a Satan worshiper. I'm sorry, that's Satan. That's Satan of the Bible that we're talking about here. So I don't know. I just I feel bad for the families. I lived in Texas for a while. I didn't live in Santa Fe, Texas, but I know the area. This is Galveston County. I used to go to Galveston. This is down near Texas City, south of Houston, close to Gulf Coast, little town. Look, I feel bad that any young people have to experience this thing, which is part of the reason I don't want to see our athletes, go to a country that's responsible for the kind of violence that Israel's involved in. So I don't know. It's look, I love the idea that our people can, our athletes can compete at a world level on on a world stage in some of these sports. I mean, I look forward to the day that we take out Canada or the United States for one of these titles. Certainly, I think our people could have handled Israel in this tournament, but the pureness of athletic competition should not be mired in the politics. It's like our kids. I mean, anybody who says, "Oh, we shouldn't boycott this kind of thing." Look, I remember here in Seneca territory, and including Tonawanda Senecas and Tuscarora territory, when our team said, "No, we're not going to compete against Lancaster School District because of the racist mascot and because of the racist behavior that those kids demonstrate towards our people." So don't suggest that utilization of our position in sports can't affect change, because you know what? Lancaster changed its name. They dropped their Redskin logo in their their name, and they changed it. And that boycotting of sports competition was a big part of that. Now, is Israel going to change its behavior towards Palestine if we don't go to the FIL men's lacrosse world championship? No, but at least we can say we're on the right side of history and the right side of justice with this thing. So I don't know. Look, I do know that that as athletes representing a people, and so when Lakeshore and Akron and Niagara Wheatfield did boycott competing against Lancaster, it was the native people who are on that team that encouraged the whole team to want to boycott. They didn't want our native people, and so these were friends and allies, if you will, or these are teammates of native kids who said, "No, I'm standing with the native kids here. They shouldn't have to be subjected to the racist comments coming from a team, boasting that they are the real Redskins or something along those lines." Yeah. So, again, I know people have mixed feelings about Israel, and again, it's easy to say, okay, we're native people that have been oppressed. Jews were oppressed, and they went through the Holocaust. Ironically, one of the other issues that I have is the fact that there are many people in Israel and many Jewish scholars and from Jewish academia who oppose and reject and take offense if we use the expression the American Holocaust. Like theirs is the only experience that the world should be aware of. We went through. We're still experiencing elements of genocide today through assimilation programs. Nobody's trying to assimilate Israel. I mean, there's countries who wish that Israel doesn't exist, and I'm not suggesting that. But nobody's trying to assimilate Jews. But we're still being, there's still an attempt to assimilate us. So anyway, thank all of you for participating in the program and on the Facebook Live feed. And the post is going to be up, so I'll look for more of your comments, and we'll engage the conversation and keep the conversation going. And we'll see what plays out. Maybe this, this conversation can grow some legs. So I can only hope. All right. So we'll see you on Monday. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Thanks for listening for the program.